With the recent Silent Hill news and Alan Wake 2 still being real, I've been eating well and have been more than content to wait around patiently, but I did not expect, nor did anyone else I assume, see Signalis coming. A lot of reviews I've seen are calling it a direct spiritual successor to classic survival horror, and it does very much deserve it. It is a straightforward survival horror game through and through until the very end, and unlike other indie games that have been called the same, I think it adds a lot more of its own original flair and feels like it took reference instead of copying them directly. It definitely gets out from under the umbrella of its inspirations and feels like a completely original experience. Developed by two single people, Signalis is one of, if not the best game I have played all year. Most of the game takes place at a 2.5D angle with little segments of story being completely in first person, which worked really well to pull me out of gameplay mode and made me focus on the plot and environment in front of me. It's a pretty simple creative choice, and it made me feel the game is so much more immersing. Like every time there's a little cutscene, I lived. The gameplay itself is pretty much what you'd expect if you're familiar with Resident Evil. You pick up different weapons as you progress, you only get so much ammo and need to conserve it, and use it as you feel is best. Lots of inventory management, and lots of lore notes lining the world that you collect to piece together what's going on. It's straightforward and never feels drawn out. There's also a perfect amount of ammo and items to survive the enemies and progress without it being overly difficult or worrisome, but not too easy. I actually missed one of the main guns too when I thought I had explored everything my first time through, which really made me want to do a second playthrough, which is very cool. Most of the combats does take place in small cramped spaces and hallways, making it very tough to get past enemies unscathed if you don't fight, which the game does punish you for, by the way, if you do that. The endings of the game are based on how much you fight and kill. The more you do, the better ending you'll get, which I felt was a little backward. I'd personally rather be rewarded for getting through areas choosing the harder route of surviving without combat, but no pacifist route here, so make sure to blast through to the end if you want the best ending. There's also no hub like there is in a lot of survival horror games. You're not in a singular spot and returning back and forth as you unlock new areas, like the mansion in Resident Evil or the room in Silent Hill 4. The room. Signalis is completely linear and yet still incorporates a good amount of backtracking and puzzles throughout the levels you're going through. You're going to need to read notes and go back and forth finding what you need to progress. It was satisfying every time I found out how to advance after getting stuck and rereading my files. Yeah, the gameplay loop felt great for what a short experience this is. And what sets Signalis apart and is definitely what makes it feel like such an original experience is the setting. The world is completely immersing. It's dark, it's set in a dystopian future where you're an android who has been sent with your human counterpart to a distant alien planet for essentially colonization and political stuff. It's a cold, harsh environment, and as I descended through the facility, mind, and beyond, it just felt hopeless. And add that with little to no music during gameplay, with nothing but the eerie noise of the corridors and the sound of movement from anything alive. Signalis does a great job of feeling like an actual horror experience without needing jump scares or an undefeatable monster. And I loved the world for that. If there was one place that I probably liked the least, it was this guy, because it was the only one that felt derivative and not completely personal. Plus, the designs of the replicas and main characters are iconic. You could recognize them with ease out of a crowd of video game robots. The two main protagonists especially. I love the blacks and whites with just a touch of ultra bright red against the dark scene of the game. I'd love to see more anime-themed horror games like this. Omori literally blew up in the art community for its style, and now the developer is now, in part, a literal full-on art company. Now, if there's one personal gripe I have with Signalis, it's probably the story. The story itself is very entertaining, and I love the idea. Thinking through what the game is trying to tell me is always fun for me, no matter what way it's told. But as I went through the game and strung together the events that were taking place, it just felt patchy. And I think it's supposed to feel that way. It's supposed to be a mystery that the player slowly starts to unravel, sure, and while it's fun to uncover everything, I think there's a lot left up to imagination, and it's pretty open-ended in spots, in my mind. And well, yes, I feel like I understood that is the point. I just have a high preference for stories that are straightforward. Like in Dark Souls, if you find notes that detail the world, that's fine to be patchy. I live for that. Thinking about what ifs is exciting for me. And Signalis does that too, that's fine. But if the main linear story is the thing that's open to interpretation, I'm just left unsatisfied. And sure, I watched others' content and made my own conclusions, but just saying, preference-wise, there was an incredibly engrossing, sad narrative that left me wanting more, but not in the best way, more like an unfinished feeling. But regardless, the story is still really good. That is just me nitpicking because Signalis is basically near a perfect game. So anything that I really have to say on the negative side is just personal preference and not a reason to avoid the game at all. I think a part of why I love the survival horror genre so much is that it blends gameplay, story, lore, and interesting worlds together in a short amount of time, whereas so many games run on and on for hours before you get to the meat of what they actually have to offer. And I'm glad to call Signalis one of the best indie survival horror games out there and one of my personal favorites, and I'm very excited to see what the developers make next. If games like this are up your alley, and I assume they are if you made it this far, it is definitely a must-play. If this video got you interested in the game, give it a like, or don't. That's up to you.